Hello and welcome to another episode of Lockdown Dads, the podcast that hopes to bring you a provocative, interesting, relevant chat each week to your life as a dad in lockdown, which we are all trying to get to grips with. I'm James Miller, author of Dads Don't Babysit and editor of workingdads.co.uk, and my co-presenter is...
My name's Ian Dinwiddie. I'm a coach, I'm an author, I write lots of blog posts and also a podcast host. I've got two children, I've got a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, and we're delighted to be joined today by James Frith. And James is a former Labour MP for Bury North. He's an entrepreneur, a business owner, and importantly for the purposes of today, he is also the dad of 4. Now, and he doesn't like to talk a lot about it, but he once performed at Glastonbury. James, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hello, Ian. Hi, James. Good to be with you both. Yeah, it's not long before I tell anyone who will listen about the Glastonbury thing, and people watching this that know me will already be tutting at how quickly it's been mentioned.
Fantastic.
I don't want to get distracted right at the beginning, but come on, we can't leave that there. I don't know this story.
So I was a singer-songwriter. I was in a band for 12 years. It's what brought me to Manchester, in fact, not just to study, but because of the music scene and the cultural scene, the music heritage that the city's so well renowned for. And I started a band the first week of university, and we were 12 years playing, gigging, touring. We supported some pretty big acts.
What was the band? Was it menswear?
It wasn't. I'll take menswear. I've not got the hips for menswear anymore, but yeah, I'd take menswear. No, we were indie rock and roll. We weren't quite the Britpop scene as the indie rock and roll side of things. We were a bit rawer, a bit more Doors, a bit more Joy Division, that sort of thing. And we played the New Bands tent on the Saturday at the 2003 Glastonbury Festival.
Was that a sunny one or a rainy one?
It was a very, very sunny one. It was amazing. And the day started with us line checking. You don't get sound check at Glastonbury. Line checking, playing a gig to a couple of hundred people who were kind of rubbing their eyes from the evening after. And we had an amazing performance. We had a few drinks afterwards backstage, and the day ended with watching Radiohead on the Pyramid stage. Who are my favourite bands, so it was a sort of best day, really.
What a result.
What a result. Of course, nothing as fulfilling as being a dad and working absolutely my hardest ever since to provide for them.
So, James, you talk about working hard to provide for the kids. I mean, and you've got 4. The first dad on the show who's got 4 kids. So tell me how things are going for you at the moment.
I thought you were going to ask me how did that happen, Ian? I thought, come on, lad, you surely you've not got this far in life without knowing. It's okay. It's okay. They're all, as with every child, they are unique and they have different personalities and they have different coping levels. And of course, their ages mean that some are more aware than others. Our 2 eldest, Jemima and Henry, have got finding new and innovative ways to excuse themselves from doing the homeschooling, which suits mum and dad as much as it suits them, I think, to be honest. And then our 2 youngest, Lizzie and Bobby, are not quite aware. Lizzie is 4, but is a very young 4, and she's not quite. She refers to when the corona is over and all of this, but she's not entirely alert to what's going on. And Bobby is all about Thomas the Tank Engine and when his next meal, or whether we can go outside on the swing. So what a life to lead, right? If those are the only priorities you've got for the day.
Definitely.
How's that affecting you? How are you coping with it?
My wife and I, we're a pretty good team, to be honest, James. We've been together for 20 years, and we kind of know each other's shortfalls. We know each other's strengths. We're pretty comfortable that we both do more than our fair share of everything. And we're doing all right. When we check in on that from time to time. Look, I mean, clearly, we'd love to go out for dinner or catch a movie or actually not be needing to sort of sneak off into the utility room just to catch a breath. But that's the reality of 4 kids, really. We're taking turns, so we'll do one day will be a day where one of us is out with them all, and the other day, you know, I get an afternoon to put some loud music on or watch a film or whatever. And so we're pretty grown up about it, to be honest.
That's interesting. I mean, Ian's going to ask me how I am, but I'm going to jump in and answer it anyway, because I want to sort of tie into that, because that's something I've been thinking about. Is what I miss is date night. Date night was always a bit naff before. Now I sort of feel like, you know, even date night within the house or something, you know, just the opportunity for the two of you to get some sort of time together would be amazing. And I can't see how that's ever going to happen. I can't see when that's going to happen.
It's hard, isn't it? Although our favourite curry house has just announced they're now doing delivery. So I think we'll probably have a curry tonight and get some wine and try and... It's about an hour and a half before you're too knackered to do anything, and you have to go to bed anyway. So, but it is about a balance, I think.
And it's also, I think it's about getting the kids into bed as well. I mean, the structure of our days is kind of just drifted, and we're 9:30 now, kind of be able to say goodnight and gone, and we're trying to get that back to 9 o'clock. And I know because Jemima, is she 10 or 11? She's about the same.
She's 10, yeah. She's 11 shortly, but she's 10, and both her and of course the proximity to age of Jemima and Henry, there's zero chance of doing different bedtimes, because I mean Henry, who is creeping nearer and nearer to my right actually as I sit there is zero chance of, I mean, he's too competitive for his own good anyway. The idea that he would go to bed ahead of his big sister is just not going to happen anytime soon. So but yeah, bedtime is harder and harder, definitely.
And how's your week, Ian? How are you doing this week?
Yeah, it's been all right. I say that every week, really. I mean, it's been Mental Health Awareness Week this week, and one of the things that triggered me slightly was something I saw on the BBC website, and I wrote about on LinkedIn because it really annoyed me. My wife got quite anxious about it, and there was a report from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and it talked about how kids from different backgrounds had different sort of experiences in terms of homeschooling and the amount of time they were spending. And it quoted 6 hours for children from more affluent backgrounds and 4.5 hours from poorer backgrounds. And there was a really important story within the article about sort of the differences between what can be achieved and what's practical achieved based on income. But that 6 hours, really, that 6 hours, 4.5 hours, really upset my wife. And her knee-jerk reaction was that we're not doing anywhere near enough time with the kids, and they're not learning enough, and what's that going to mean long term? And I genuinely thought it was nonsense. I thought there's no possible way that could be right. So I went and did a bit of research, went to the original report, and the way it had been, I don't want to kind of go over all the stuff I sort of talked about previously, but the way it had been tracked was that essentially if a child was reported by their parents to have done some academic work within an hour time slot between 9 and 10, that counted as 1 hour. And if they did 10 minutes in the next hour, it was another hour. And I felt that as we're sort of marking Mental Health Awareness Week, it wasn't the headline on the BBC article, but it was second or third paragraph that said, these kids out there, we talked to 4,000 parents, and these kids are doing enormous amounts of homeschooling.
Yeah, I remember. I think the Today Show may have run something on that, and that I heard kind of half asleep one morning, thought, that's just a load of bollocks, frankly. I don't believe exactly. Don't believe a word of it. And I think what's quite interesting doing they're on Seesaw, the kids, for their work, this home page, this website rather. You log in and you got your own unique number, etc. And the teachers set the work and you work through it. But what is deemed a class that might take a teacher with potentially 30 kids an hour, actually 1-to-1, you get through it pretty quickly anyway. So we found our stride a bit this last few weeks, but by no means anything like that level of hours. But in terms of accomplished tasks and activities, then I think that's the way to look at it, as opposed to simply the hours. Because I mean, and also the kids' favourite is to say, "No, I've done all my work," and they've been at the desk for about 11 minutes. It's like, okay.
Yeah, I think, and that was a challenge. It was like, well, how can this be out there without anyone sort of checking and saying, actually, you've just really upset millions of parents. And it's almost, in terms of my post on LinkedIn, it's almost viral in terms of the responses and people saying, I saw this, thank you for looking into the detail, because we felt really inadequate. And
Absolutely.
I think the one thing we don't want to do as parents at the moment is to feel inadequate about what we're trying to achieve. So that was something that stuck out for this week. Other things, getting my son involved in trying to teach him to be, trying to help him to be confident on a bike. So we're kind of doing a bit of skills, upskilling. So that's been something we've been working quite hard. It's been a little bit frustrating at times, but there's lots of high fives, and we are winning generally. So that's good.
Does that lead us on to When I'm 64, our next feature? Or see that smooth? Just imagine. Once again, we can't afford the music, obviously. You've got to imagine music. But that's an interesting point, because my son also has suddenly taken to a bike where he hasn't before. He hasn't been interested, but he wants to go into London. And we can see London from our house. We can see the Shard, but we can't go there. And it seems really close, but it's still really far away. And we sort of said, well, the only way we can get there is on a bike. So suddenly he wants to get on a bike. It's interesting that your son's been on a bike. I can see James has got his bike behind him, which, I've also been reading the Secret Diary of Adrian Mole again this week. So I'm reminded of Adrian Mole's racing bike, I have to say, looking at that bike behind him. Adrian Mole really stands up as well, by the way. I mean, I last time read it when I was about 12. It's really good. But I wonder if that's something that, in 20 years' time, we'll sort of look back at bikes and biking to become a bigger thing because of this. And that would be I think that would be a positive outcome from obviously what is a fairly unpleasant experience for the entire world at the moment.
No, I was going to say, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the chart. I mean, I know James has got a nice and shiny new bike there, and we've been trying to get one for my daughter, and actually really struggling because the number of people who are doing things differently. I mean, we're still waiting to see about where we are in London. The bike superhighway route is probably not as well developed, and it is a particular challenge for London because the commuting distances tend to be longer. And whether biking will catch on, or whether you need to be a little bit closer than we are. We're 16 miles, I think, into London, and whether we need to be a bit closer for that biking to work. But it's a massive opportunity. I don't know what you think, James Frith.
Yeah, we actually have used the bikes a lot more than before recently. I, in fact, bought that a few weeks before any suggestion of lockdown was, because with my change of circumstances and we've only got one car, we've only ever needed one car. I bought a bike because I thought I'm done with negotiating with Nikki on the car, and it's nice to have a bit of freedom to get to the gym or go for a swim or just get out on it to go and see someone or whatever. So I literally got on my bike and got one, and I'm glad to have done so, because my brother is now trying to get a bike and is failing spectacularly. He set up Google alerts on a whole range of bikes just so he can learn of a bike coming on sale. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think we're all trying to second guess a bit about the legacy of this mess. Certainly, it will be something that we reflect on in years to come as being an enormous moment. I hope it isn't just the start of what we still know in 20 years' time, and that sort of vaccines or morphing of viruses taking different forms and different levels of sort of virulence. And I mean, one thing I'm so thankful of is just how little impact or effect the virus has had on kids. As a dad, it's a huge weight off the mind that there is less of a threat to the kids. Particularly, one of my children, Henry's got the letter saying you're at risk because he's got significant asthma. You're going to see her first appearance.
Yeah.
Say hello, Bobby. Do you want to say hello, Bobby?
Let's say hello.
Your big, this is our youngest, Bobby, who's being wound up by his sister.
Oh,
yeah.
Can't imagine that could happen. Never happens in our house.
Henry has now run back in, upset that Bobby's featured ahead of him. Remember about the competition. So I'll just let him say hello.
Hello.
Hi, Bobby. Sorry, Henry.
There's a slight lightness, isn't there?
There he is, yeah.
Your schoolwork. Stop trying to get out your schoolwork.
Yeah, do your schoolwork. Listen, he's a head teacher. Aren't you?
If you're wondering who did my haircut, it was Daddy.
Oh,
So Daddy had to step in. Daddy had to step in because he came down having shaved this side of his head off. So I had to step in and make do of it. So anyway, all right. Say goodbye.
He gets to do yours now. That's how it works.
No, that's not the rule.
Oh.
Although to my embarrassment, I was quite a bit older than he is when I first cut my hair. I think I was about 13 and came down in tears, saying to my mother, like, "Look what I've done." So the fact that my 8-year-old has done it, it's fine. But no, the when I'm 64 thing is interesting. I think this is the most profound moment in our generation, isn't it? Really, the pandemic. Yes, there have been wars. And people and their families and people that have served have lost their lives or sacrificed themselves for that, but nothing on the scale in terms of the impact of the whole of the country in the same way. This is very much everyone's first pandemic.
And I suppose, I mean, you were on the education committee, right?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
So I think, you know, that is what a lot of people are talking about just now, and I think, you know, whether it's when I'm 64 or when I'm 44, I think, or right now, it's what people are talking about, are going to be talking about, you know, what the impact of being out of school is going to be in a year's time on the kids or in 20 years' time. Because, you know, as far as I see it, being out of school bakes in inequality, and that is a very bad thing. Obviously, there's safety as well. You've got to balance up these things. And am I right in thinking that Bury Council was one of the first to say they're not going to open their schools?
That's right. It's been quite a contentious week for the decision. I came out in support of it, actually, because a few days prior, my wife and I, as I'm sure is the case for a lot of parents, had this constant, you know, what are we going to do? Will we apply some discretion? Will we risk it? Is it worth it? And also, to be honest as well, the fact that it was only half of them going back, you kind of think it's sort of something and nothing as well. And in the north, in Bury, in Greater Manchester, we're at least 2 weeks behind the London bubble around the R8. There's no tracking and tracing, even with the recruitment of nurses and the team of track and tracers being recruited. The training and the facilities and the sort of plan isn't in place yet. And I learned this morning on The Guardian that scientists, the SAGE committee, have now said there is no science to support going back as early as June the 1st because of the track and tracing infrastructure that isn't up to speed. So we had made that judgment before Bury then announced it, and I was quick to come out in support of it. And I think it's been proven to be the right call for anxiety levels and also just the instincts of parents.
But what about this inequality issue? I mean, presumably you're aware of that from your work on the committee, and
I'm aware, I'm aware of it as to why my politics is about addressing inequality. And my view is that the health of everybody has to be the uppermost in our minds. As to, you know, it becomes quite difficult to listen to some Conservative ministers for whom I think have sponsored the rise in inequality, arguing for that being the reason why schools all need to go back. I think that's rather borrowed clothing, if I'm honest. But of course, we need to address the inequality, and I think the government recently announced it was giving laptops to certain, you know, kids that were on free school meals would get access to new hardware and tech kit. These announcements deserve some scrutiny because they're easier to announce than deliver.
It's also about a lot more than hardware, isn't it? I mean, that's the other thing, is that you can give a disadvantaged child, and obviously that takes in an awful lot of different sorts of children. You can give them, you know, a router and a laptop, and that isn't necessarily what they need.
Yep.
So
I quite agree. I quite agree. The point is it's not about no to not going back. It's about saying not yet. And I think not yet can be revisited on a weekly or fortnightly basis. But the government was too slow to lockdown. It mustn't now try and correct a mistake with another mistake and be too quick to unlock down. And I think that's where I'm at as a parent. I don't appreciate you probably losing viewers now because it's got all political, but I say that as from a parental instinct more than anything else.
I think one of the sort of leads on to when I'm 44, and I think the two sort of meld together here. I think the thing when I'm 44, which is, in a year or two's time, I think one of the things that we'll look back on and will be impacted by this is this big decision. Is that, you look on the WhatsApp groups, and I'm sure you're having the same, Ian, is that some parents are gung-ho and like, I need to get to work and get my children out of my house. And some parents are like, I'm really worried about the safety issue and I don't want to send them back. Or, there's parents at my kids' school who, have older relatives living with them, and this is clearly not going to send their kids back come what may because their mother is shielding in the attic or whatever. So I think there's an issue here, isn't there, there's real potential for problems between parents about whether to send your kids back or not. Are you finding that, Ian?
Yeah, well, I think the WhatsApp groups are really interesting because there tends to be a prevailing view, and people don't tend to step out of that. So once it becomes in these groups, it tends to self-reinforce, and certainly there's a lot of concern locally. So the parents who are saying things in the WhatsApp group, and let's be honest, when I say parents, I really mean mums, because that's how, as we've discussed in the past, that's how these WhatsApp groups tend to be made up of. They tend to be parents who the odd dad, of which I am one, and I know you are as well. And the concern, and generally the feeling is homeschool is really, really hard, and it's at breaking point emotionally, certainly where you've got multiple children who need to be looked after, babies, preschoolers, as well as kids who are trying to learn. But at the same time, these parents who don't really want to be doing homeschooling, and it's putting them under pressure, are also very concerned about the implications of going back. There's a lot of talk about September being the ideal, and I just hope that if we can't do anything this side of the summer holidays, then hopefully September there will be enough of a change, and more people will have confidence. That geographical element that you're talking about, James, I think is really interesting because, like you say, it does feel. We were joking, James and Miller and I, we were joking on text today or the other day about how the sun's out and COVID's gone from London, and that's it's quite easy to get that impression. We are being blasé, but it's quite easy to get that impression. Different parts of the country are going to treat it differently, and I think from a governmental point of view, I think those nuances need to be recognised and understood, and things are going to move at a different speed. But yeah, people are at a breaking point in terms of homeschooling. It doesn't help when you hear that you hear 6 hours and go, yeah, not really, when that kind of thing gets put out there. But also there is that concern and fear about safety, and certainly large numbers of kids won't go back. We would send ours back. I'm going to be honest. We think we're not screening. We don't have a choice though, because we're year 2 and year 5. So even if the current plan were to go into place in our primary school, then we wouldn't be involved anyway. So we don't have some of those issues in terms of some would go back and some wouldn't.
And so, I mean, in most cases, the schools now is a sort of lottery system anyway. My brother, his children were. They said they indicated yes they would, and they were told, well, you've not been drawn in the lot, because of the social distance requirement and the size of the school capacity, etc. So there's a whole host of kind of second and third answers and questions and arguments that are needed when somebody simply says, right, June the 1st it is, and everyone back. Actually, it's not everyone, and actually a lot of people won't go back. So it's quite a complicated mix for sure. But the inequality argument absolutely is we've got to address that. We don't address inequality simply by sending everyone back to school though. That's also part of the problem.
Yes, I take your point very much. Gavin Williamson suddenly at the weekend deciding inequality is a big deal.
Yeah,
and I don't understand why he didn't shut the schools in March and say, look, this is a real pain. We've got to shut the schools. I appreciate it's a bad thing for inequality. We'll get them open as soon as we can because I very much understand the inequality issues, instead of just shutting the schools. Suddenly.
Yeah, and I was talking
inequality.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could do with a better leader in the Department for Education for sure. Anyway, we won't go on to that. But the secondary school thing is in our eldest starts in September in high school. So it's quite a sort of goodness, she's not had the chance to say goodbye. She'll have lost the last 4 or 5 months of school, primary school. And that's a concern for us, as well as a sort of anxiety level. But talking to a head teacher this afternoon, or lunchtime today, to do with my job now, she was saying that the most recent conversations that their trust leaders have had with the DfE are talking about even a staggered return from September for high schools. And I mean, high schools would be the easiest to social distance because they're young adults, aren't they, essentially? So, or young people. So I think, we're in for the long haul. And I think all the time on crisis, not unlike grief or the kind of response to a shocking event, it's never really about needing to see where this ends. It's about understanding where the next marker is. And I think for us, we've had, there was the March lockdown, then there was the 3 or 4 weekly review, then there's this June date for review. Now that it's, will we get to go on holiday? Then there's the September possibility. In reality, we could get to the middle of next year and think, gosh, thank goodness we didn't know it was going to take 18 months to get to this point. But I think that's part of the psyche that we need those, even if they end up being false dawns, we need those horizons to focus on, and that helps pull us through.
Does that lead us on to the tips? Because from what we're talking about here, especially in terms of the discussion about whether to send your children back to school or whether if that's an option, it comes back to that being kind to yourself. I think you've got to make that decision, and hopefully in concert with your partner. But it's your decision ultimately, and don't beat yourself up about it. And I spent a few years now making podcasts about Brexit, and much as I don't want to introduce that into the discussion,
I refuse.
But there's something about disagreeing well here, I think, in the sense that James Frith, you're saying you wouldn't send your kids back. I think actually Ian and I probably would, but again, that's partly due to geography. That, and it's okay to say, well, you make your decision and we make ours. I make mine. Ian and I aren't doing it in concert. We haven't got the same children. It's okay to disagree. If some parents do want to send their kids back and some people don't, that's fine. And I just wonder if that's the tips to take out of this, is to sort of be kind to yourself and be kind to others.
Look, I think we've all, I think we were talking before we started recording, and I think we've all been rather reminded of how vulnerable we are, and the kind of the psyche of Britain is one of it, that we're sort of exceptional. In reality, we're not. We're with the human race, this great earth of ours, and we've got to be a bit kinder to each other. We've got to be a bit humbler. And if a virus can do this to us, what on earth will climate change do? And I think we've got to try and rescue from this and build back better, as the phrase has been adopted, but rescue some of the ambitions. So I want to see communities and governments and local authorities and businesses turning their hands to the ambitions for the future, not simply to be there when there's a fire to put out, but actually, okay, how do we encourage a better society? How do we encourage a better business world? How do we encourage a better level of equality? We talked about inequality in schools. It's not simply by sending everyone back to school, but addressing some of the fundamentals. And I just hope that, the right-wing press will talk about it being, Britain falling in love with the state again. I just think we've got to reconnect, discover the possibilities that man has, as in human, has to do this, and get on a front footing for the challenges ahead. And actually that can be quite an exciting prospect, can be the dawning of a new era, as a result of being reminded how vulnerable we are, but also what we can achieve together.
You got tips around this, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, it's
basically humankind. I mean, that's quite a big tip. I'm not knocking it.
I'm struggling to follow that one.
I mean, I've also got a list. I've got a list of like not drinking before midday and getting out on the bike. I mean, don't get me wrong. This is not. Yeah. I've got
all scales are good here. It's fine.
Yes.
So
that was perhaps that was two BBC4, and you're after ITV3. That's fine. We can go between the two.
we can go everywhere. I think just referencing back really to what we were talking about earlier about one-to-one time as a couple and one-to-one time with your kids. And I can't imagine how hard it must be for you, James, when you've got 4 to carve out bits of time, even under normal circumstances, bits of time with each child. And that's one of the things I've been really thankful for this week in terms of, helping Struan with his cycling, is that my daughter was doing a ballet class, so we went out round the corner, and it was hard work. The first one was really hard work because he's not confident, and we're just trying to control. And but it's one-on-one time in a way that at the moment, one-on-one time, it doesn't really happen because it's kind of like supervising homework stuff, and then you're just glad when they're doing something else for a bit. But seeking out that one-to-one time, I think, would be my top tip, both in terms of your kids and with your partner.
This has been the Lockdown Dads podcast. And if you've enjoyed what we've discussed and if you have thoughts on it, and I'm sure you do, we've done some big tips there. They were all really good tips, but they were proper tips, they were. Or indeed, if you have thoughts on the debate around sending your kids back to school or not, and that obviously is a decision that some people will be taking in the very near future, within the next sort of 7 days, once this podcast has landed, then get in touch either through the Inspiring Dads website, or you can find us on Twitter, where I am at Political Yeti and Ian is at Ian Dinwiddie. Is that right?
Yep.
And
at James Frith on Twitter for me.
Oh, and you can talk to him about it. Yeah, if you've got any stupid thoughts, go and talk to him. Yes, and if you're watching this on YouTube, then please comment below and give us a like. And if you are listening on wherever you get your podcast, please rate and review us. Ian.
James, thank you very much for being our guest this week, and thank you for covering some really meaty topics in terms of education and some of the side that perhaps as lockdown dads we're perhaps a little bit blasé about. But thank you for shining a light and discussing that with us. For those of you watching, thank you very much for being here, and this has been the Lockdown Dad Show. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye. Cheers. Bye.